is going to be a fellow Microsoft certified trainer, expert in training for certifications, corporate training. And today, again, Jason, which will introduce himself in a moment, and I will talk about how to boost productivity for manufacturing and distribution companies, and particularly this, which is a series of events. And today is about training strategy, because nothing really gets the you cannot really get anything from a training program or session if you don't plan it and if you don't build it on a solid strategy, training strategy foundations. So, Jason, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about a bit of who you are, what you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Jason Brown. I'm based in Mississippi in the U.S. I'm a solution architect for Microsoft. I actually work for a partner in the partner channel. I've been a solution architect for 10 years. I've been doing consulting for 15 years, and I've been working with the Microsoft stack my entire career, which is 30 years. And so I am a Microsoft certified trainer. I have recently pivoted into the world of AI in the last year or so because it's up and coming, and Microsoft is starting to introduce more and more AI into their products. So I'm a certified solution architect in AI, agentic AI as well with Microsoft. So dual certified in terms of solution architecture. Today talking about training strategy, I think is very important because if you don't have a plan, things don't go well.
Exactly. That's very true.
So,
well, go on. Yeah, you can tell us more about what you mean by strategy, because, we often think of strategy as something rather abstract, right? That people in suits in boardrooms, right, talk about, but really training strategy and in our job is essential. So what is it? Because it can be quite abstract, right? Or even not very easy to define. How do you define a training strategy? How do you measure a good training strategy versus a bad one?
So first of all, I believe in process-based training, not curriculum-based. Okay, I know Microsoft produces curriculum, and in order to get the certifications, you have to pretty much go through their curriculum and understand their curriculum. But from a corporate perspective, process-based training makes a lot more sense than from a certification perspective, right? So in curriculum-based training, you're learning the clicks, you're learning the screens, you're learning where to go, but you're not really understanding the why. And so in corporate training, it's much more important to understand the why, so that you're training to make decisions and training to handle exceptions and training on the process, so that when the software changes, you can adapt. Microsoft is always introducing new features, and we don't want to train just people who know how to click. And a lot of times when I go into manufacturing companies, they have old green screen systems, and when I ask them, how do you do this in your system, they rattle off, oh, it's a 257. Well, I say, what do you mean a 257? Well, that's the keys I push on the keyboard to get to that screen. It's 2, 5, and 7. And so it's very rigid, right? And so, in its core, D365 is process agnostic. Until you configure it, it doesn't do anything, right? And so we configure it based on requirements from each company, which is different, and we configure it for their processes specifically. So it makes sense to train around a process instead of training through a curriculum. And what I mean by that is like training by roles, for example. So training a warehouse supervisor, training a warehouse picking person, training a shipping person, a transportation person, or even in the accounting side, training like an AP clerk or an AR clerk. Those types of positions have certain workflows they do every day, and we want to modernize those workflows as part of implementing a new ERP system. Right, so that kind of leads into the second point of my conversation, in that modernization is key. You don't want to reproduce bad processes in your new system. So if you're spending all the time and the money to implement a new system, You don't want to introduce bad habits and bad data and bad processes that you have in your old system. A lot of people refer to it as a lift and shift, where you're just taking what you have, and a lot of the older, I would say the older generation that I encounter versus the younger generation, they're more resistant to change, right? And so they want D365 to do exactly what their old system did. And by doing that, you're losing a lot of capability. You're losing a lot of productivity. You're losing a lot of, opportunity in adopting some new modernization, new ways of doing things. So modernization, I feel like is very important. You don't want to digitize a bad process.
That's very true, Jason. Can I intercept here, because I believe you said
Absolutely.
something very important. And even though my specialty is Dynamics Business Central, which is for smaller organizations where processes sometimes are on purpose designed to be agile, a common mistake that people make is that, oh, well, we need to define the processes first, right? And you said it very, very well. Dynamics is process agnostic. Now, in finance and operation is more, it's more visible. In Business Central, it's less strict, but the principle is the same. Now, you hear, and I hear, and I read on LinkedIn a lot of things. The process is wrong. If the process is wrong, the application is wrong. But that comes with there is a problem with that, right? When so-called LinkedIn gurus using ChatGPT, tell me something I can write about an ERP. LinkedIn ERP projects don't fail because of software; they fail because of processes. That's what 99%, AI will tell you, which is a cliche, because who decides what good process is? Who? This is really the challenge. Now, this hides, right, a bias that some consultants and even solution architects often have. That they learn the process in TENSOL 257, as you said, because they learn the software based on Microsoft curriculum. First is product design. Then it's variants and product dimensions. Then it's about posting profiles, right? That is curriculum based, and though the curriculum is arranged around a process, because of course you cannot possibly remember 250 pages if you don't connect the dots. But that is just one way of doing things, and it's the safest way for Microsoft. By the way, SAP, Oracle, they have order to cash, procure to pay. They have the same, right?
Absolutely.
It's just one way of doing it, and that hides a problem. The problem of fit to standard, which if everybody trained fit to standard, every company would operate in the same way. There will be no differentiation, right? So I believe that, modernize before you train, adopt the technology, scope it and configure it, not to fit a standard, but to fit your processes, right? And then you train on top of that. What do you think of that? Do you agree with that? Does it resonate?
I totally agree with that. I think you should involve the process owners in this, not just the functional consultants or the solution architects. I think it should be a team effort between the client and the consulting firm and the people that are on the project, because they know their processes and they know their business better than we ever will. Exactly. We know the software, and we know the software, really well. But every engagement you go into is different. Everybody has their own nuances and their own processes, but you have to identify the ones that are good processes versus bad processes, and weed out those and modernize those that need to be modernized, right? Another thing that's important is also, I feel like tribal knowledge is something I encounter a lot, and especially in the manufacturing industry when they've been running on the same software for 20, 30 years. And the same guy's been on the factory floor, the same guy's been in the quality shop for 20 years. There's a lot of tribal knowledge that you have to root out, and you need to be able to articulate that tribal knowledge so that you can then turn it into some training material. Because eventually Bob or George or Ann or whoever it is going to retire, or they're going to leave the company, right? Exactly. So that's another major modernization process is taking that tribal knowledge and getting that transcribed into some training materials so that you can train others to do that. And sometimes that feels a little, the end users are a little resistant to that because it's kind of like their knowledge, right? And they feel like that's what makes them important in the company. Exactly. But you have to overcome that. You have to overcome that in the sense that you need to be able to train on this tribal knowledge. It can't always be just in Joe's head.
Exactly, absolutely. Jason, I think it is incredibly important. Training users on how to use the software, given what we discussed before about processes, and at the same time training those who will be the new ones, right? Those who will take the role of the experts, right? It's a different kind of training, isn't it? Train for adoption and train to make expert, train the trainer, right?
Yep, absolutely. I always look for process champions. That's what I call them.
Process champions.
Process champions, or super. The old term in the old days was super users.
Yeah, exactly. Right. In business,
and so that's the ones who are going to lead the work streams. They're going to learn the system. They're going to be able to train others because they know the system well. So that when the training is over from the partner or from myself, they have somebody internally that has internalized that particular work stream, like you mentioned, procure to pay or order to cash or produce, consume to produce, those kind of things. You need someone who's going to be the champion or multiple champions of that work stream, depending on how big it is. And then the other thing I think is real important too in training, since we're talking about, sort of strategy, is using real data. Go out and get their transactions, get their items, as early as possible. And you want to train on scenarios that make sense to them, because metrics that are tied to their processes and their data, they're going to remember that a lot more than just generic training or training in Microsoft Contoso data or whatever, because they can say, oh, okay, I see how this applies to my job. I see how I'm now going to use this to track my production orders, or I'm going to use this to track my quality orders. And if you make it applicable to them, they're much more likely to be engaged, and they're much more likely to be remember it longer term, right? Exactly. And so I think it's very important that you make it relatable to their day-to-day processes and day-to-day job.
So 100%, Jason. Something that we often forget, because we are experts, right? Consultants, trainers. We work with the application, with the product every day, and like in our case, like decades, more than a decade, right? We tend to take concepts and principles about the product design, user interface, logic, database data for granted. But to a user who's busy 9 to 5 because they need to take care of their job, who have been using an old system, maybe again for decades, now they need to learn a new tool, new product, new terminology, new user interface, potentially, hopefully, new processes, right? It's a hell of a lot, right? Forgive me the strong language. And so the more we make it relatable,
absolutely,
for them, the less friction we get through the training. And something incredibly valuable happens when the users get that eureka moment, right? The little light bulb moment. They're going to say, right, I can see how that applies to my job. I can see how next time a container is delayed, I can update my system, and that will propagate to the planning, MPS, and MRP. Mm-hmm. I can see how that relates to my job. That's the key message, right? And so
absolutely,
data, as you said, is very critical. Now, on the other side of the equation, though, we might have, this challenge where you need to train the users because the project needs to go on, move on, and the data is not ready, and data migration is daunting. And so I'll tell you my approach quickly, and I want you to tell you what you think. I was telling a client of mine actually the other day about that. But look, take me, and it was a sales director. No, take me. Give me, not take it. Give me one customer record for every scenario where a different sales process applies.
Mm-hmm.
So, how many sales process scenarios do you have in your department? So the director said, well, we have direct to consumer, retail, we have wholesale, we have affiliates, right? And we also have our shops, right? We have omni-channel, we have like 4 different channels, right? Out of those 4 or 5 channels, you don't really have, from a sales point of view, a lot of variety. Fulfillment might, product, distribution centers, right? But from a sales point of view, if you narrow it down to 4 scenarios, one is to prepay, another's got must be billed on contract, another one's got a customer on on consignment. Give me 1 or 2 records for each scenario. That's good enough, right? Because we don't need 20 customers where the same process applies. And so usually that gets me good data fast for training. And then data migration can keep going. It will keep going for months until they get all the 60,000 SKUs with the right dimensions, right? It takes time. What do you think of this approach?
No, I absolutely agree with you. That's the same approach that I take. If the data is not available in mass when the training is scheduled to start, then we certainly ask for, I do the same thing you do. I ask for variations in the products. I ask for variations in the customers. I ask for variations in the vendors. It applies to every data set, really, because I need to know if you're building kits in your warehouse, that's going to be a different process and a different SKU where you're combining 2 products to make a kit. Or maybe you're buying a kit and breaking it apart and selling the components, the opposite, and so I need to know all those variations so that we can create training scenarios for those variations. One thing also that I would like to mention that you kind of keyed a memory, a thought on, is I think it's important to practice and train on a process end to end, like almost people used to call it a day in the life, right? Where we don't just train the salesperson in isolation and the warehouse person in isolation and the AP person in isolation. And, we train, like we go through an entire transaction from beginning to end where we run the sales order. We send the pick ticket to the warehouse. The pick ticket or the production order gets processed, and then it gets picked from the floor to a final shipping location. Then it gets shipped. Then it gets invoiced. Then it gets, a payment applied to it. So I believe tying that whole process together is very important, and people can latch onto that more so than just training in isolation. And the AP clerk not understanding what the warehouse is doing or not understanding what the shipping guys are doing. They don't have to know how to do their job, but they should at least understand the process of when I make this sale and when I release this to the warehouse, what happens next? Well, there's somebody out there that's got to go pick the product, right? And so I think training on those end-to-end scenarios is also very important.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing this. That's critical. I always also try to do the same, trying to connect the dots from sales to fulfillment, inventory management, procurement, and replenishment, right? And absolutely, very critical. Again, which means, and then we're running out of time now, but I want to leave one concept that maybe we can discuss another day. The importance of having a process map where you can identify the upstream and downstream process areas of one area. So we are trading sales. What's upstream? CRM, quotes, lead management, right? And what's downstream on sales? Credit control, right? Credit management, so cash management, fulfillment, inventory, right? And so once you have the main process, the upstream, what needs to happen before, or the downstream, now you can get your sort of a map, right? And that is the baseline for which we're discussing today, right? A training strategy, which is not a curriculum. It's not about features. It's about role-based and process-based, right? And that's key for
Absolutely.
Dynamics applications.
Absolutely. I think it's applicable in F&O and in BC. It's the same.
Yeah, the same.
I actually call that a matrix is what I call it, but
True,
a training matrix where we outline all the processes up and downstream. Yeah, I mean, I think that the more well planned you are, the better strategy that you have, the better your execution is going to be. Right?
Exactly.
It's not something to be skipped over or to be put on the back burner or to be the redheaded stepchild, because you don't have time. If you don't train and have a training strategy, it's going to be a difficult implementation.
It's very difficult implementation, absolutely. And you can tell, I can tell, because we've been on that side too, right? We'll be on the consultant side, not just training for the sake of training. We've been, behind the trenches, helping clients go live, and so
absolutely,
we know exactly how we feel. It's excellent. Well, Jason, it's 31 minutes, so we can close it here. Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody. We had 3 or 4 people online. We have about 20 people on LinkedIn who are watching, which is great. But usually the LinkedIn algorithm will pick up over the next few days, and so, and of course, for those of you who have registered and not been able to attend today, you will see this one as a recording, because everybody who registered but could not attend will get the recording in their mailbox. So feel free to send me an email. Jason details will be in an email if you want to reach out to Jason. If you've got a F&O project going on, F&O training for certifications, or corporate training for certifications, you will see on our website a booking page for Jason. I will also share his email address so you can reach out to him directly. And Jason, I will see you in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll have another session about training bites, learning bites to boost productivity for manufacturing and distribution companies.
Thank you very much, Alfredo.
Thank you all. Talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.